Welcome to version 24 of the Brawl Stars tier list. Let's start this off by talking about the new brawlers. Although it's been a few months since Squeak was released, this is actually his first time on the tier list. When Squeak was first added to the game, he was very Squeak. I promise it's my only dumb joke this video. His super and his main attack were really slow and very easy to avoid, but after a lot of recent buffs, Squeak has climbed a lot higher in the tier list and is now a well-balanced brawler that lands in either the A tier or the B tier for every mode. Also in the tier list is Buzz. Buzz hasn't had a single balance change since he was released and has been very good right from day one. He has some serious damage output up close, and his super allows him to get close to brawlers that have a long range as well, and he can recycle his super very well, which makes him good at defeating multiple brawlers, and thanks to his stun, he can sometimes even wipe out entire teams. He's pretty good everywhere and is even considered S tier in Siege. Next we've got Grift, who really isn't a bad option other than in Bounty. He isn't quite as versatile as Buzz is, but he's a very good brawler for maps that are wide and open, and with his gadget being able to destroy walls in order to open up the map, he's really good at making any map open, which is really ideal for him, especially like in Brawl Ball. And the most recent brawler added to the game is Ash. Now at the time that I had the pros vote on this tier list, not a lot of people had played Ash since he was on tier 30 of the tier list, so his rankings may be adjusted in the future, but as for right now, the pros say that he's a little bit below average and is nearly unusable in Bounty or Knockout. If you do need to push him, Gem Grab and Brawl Ball are your go-to modes, although I will say that even though we're not including Showdown in this video, Ash is actually pretty good in Solo Showdown. Now up next, I'm going to talk about the brawlers that moved up significantly since the last tier list, but first, I wanted to give a huge thank you to the 26 pro players who voted on every brawler for every 3v3 game mode. These are some of the best brawlers in the world, and I also had 29 players over 35,000 trophies and higher than Mythic and Power League vote as well. Whenever there was a close vote between the pros, I used these highly ranked players as tiebreakers. Now Leon may be the most improved brawler in the game. Not only has he moved up multiple tiers in every game mode, but that includes moving from the F tier to the S tier in Hot Zone, and it's mostly because of, you guessed it, his new gadget. His gadget is pretty much good anywhere you place it, but in certain spots on certain maps, it is a total game changer, especially if the enemy team does not have a way to get rid of it easily. He is also very good for sneaking up on brawlers with low health and holding his ground against Mortis, who is very good for the current meta. Now Brock is putting up a very good fight for the most improved brawler as well, although he didn't start out in the F tier for almost every game mode. Supercell kept buffing Brock's main attack damage until it was a little bit too strong and actually enabled him to take out half the brawlers in the game, which is one rocket fuel rocket and a regular attack to follow up with it. They have since made a slight emergency nerf, but overall he's still buffed since the last tier list, and now he's in the S tier for over half of the game modes. Spike has moved up at least one tier in every game mode and even made it into the S tier for Brawl Ball. Not only does he play well against a lot of the brawlers that are top tier right now, but his new live plant gadget has made a world of difference for him. It counters a lot of brawlers and allows him to win his lane against some brawlers that he used to not be able to beat. Rico has moved up in every game mode and has found himself in the S tier for Heist. Very similar to Spike, Rico's new bouncy catchable gadget has made Rico a much more powerful brawler, even after it's been nerfed. We've actually been seeing a lot less of Robo Retreat in competitive gameplay because Rico no longer has to retreat nearly as often, recover all of his HP with one shot. Next we got El Primo, who has been on a roller coaster for a while. He was one of the worst brawlers in the game, then he was buffed so hard he became one of the best brawlers in the game, then he got nerfed, which placed him around average. Now El Primo is probably the most controversial brawler among all of the pros. In every game mode, El Primo would get a couple of people voting for S tier and some voting for F tier and everything in between. It might just ultimately come down to how good of an El Primo you are, but he seems to be pretty average right now. Edgar is obviously not as strong as he was when he was first released, but he got nerfed so hard that he was unusable in competitive play, and since then Edgar received his Fisticuff star power, his hardcore gadget, and a slight boost to his health recovery, so at least now he's a pretty solid option to use when you're trying to counter specific brawlers. Crow has finally moved up to being about an above average brawler, which is something that every legendary brawler should at least be, right? Between his slowing toxin gadget and his ability to decrease the healing of enemy abilities by half, he is an excellent brawler in the right team comp and especially against certain brawlers. Now Mortis has finally received the buff that players have been waiting for, but it might just be a little too much. When the effect effects of Coiled Snake became a permanent ability. His Creepy Harvest star power, which had been getting buffed over and over and over again, immediately became the go-to star power for him. His survivability sometimes allows Mortis to completely wipe out the enemy team, and he is now a very high tier brawler, except for in Heist. Please don't play him in Heist. Now let's talk about the brawlers that have moved down significantly since the last tier list, and then we'll talk about the tier list for each game mode. First off, we have Colette. Now she is definitely a great option if you know the enemy team is playing a tanky brawler or several tanky brawlers. However, now that tanks are able to automatically recharge their super when they take damage, there are better anti-tank brawlers that are able to better deal with brawlers like Bull or El Primo jumping on you when they get their super charged up. Other than in Heist, Colette just is not a competitive option anymore. And Jessie also went down in every single game mode other than Knockout, which doesn't count because it's new to this tier list. She's received a ton of nerfs this year, and she just is not as good as she used to be. It is no surprise that Stu is going down in a few modes since he has been nerfed a fair amount since the last tier list. Despite those nerfs, he's still very competitive, especially in Gem Grab and Brawl Ball. Max is also pretty competitive still despite the nerf to her super. She doesn't really shine as the best in any mode anymore, but she's still a competitive option. Sprout is still an A tier brawler in most of the game modes. It's still a very good brawler, but brawlers that it struggles with like Stu or Mortis or Leon are a lot more common now, which means that Sprout still just struggles. It does look like pros are still picking Sprout a lot, especially when his counter picks are not selected in the match for Power League. Barley is running into a lot of the same problems that Sprout is running into and is struggling even more so, other than in Heist and Siege, where he's still an S tier option thanks to his high damage output. Rosa is one of the tanky brawlers that did not get the trait that most of the other tanks did, which is why she is going down in 4 of the game modes, even though she hasn't had any sort of balance change in a long time. Now I'm going to show you guys the tier list for each of the 3v3 game modes. After that, I'm going to show you guys the overall tier list, which literally ranks all the brawlers from worst to best. Here are the F tier and the C tier brawlers for Gem Grab. I won't be talking about these brawlers very much because they're just not that great in Gem Grab, especially in competitive play. Next, we have the B tier for Gem Grab, and these brawlers are usable, but only on the right maps or with the right teammates or as counters against specific brawlers. 8-Bit Jessie, Barley, Mr. P, and Rosa are moving down into the B tier, which is why they have a red frame around them. Edgar and El Primo are moving up into the B tier since the last tier list, and Ash and Griff are actually starting off in the B tier, which is represented by their green frames. Brawlers in the black frame were in the same tier in the last tier list, which was 23. Next are our A tier brawlers. Byron, Max, Poco, and Sprout are moving down from the S tier into the A tier, and then we have Bo, Crow, Pam, and Spike who are moving up from lower tiers. Buzz and Squeak are also starting out in the A tier. These brawlers are almost always solid choices, but are still dependent on the S tier brawlers that they are facing, or are just not as good as the S tier brawlers. And these are the S tier brawlers, which are Belle, Sandy, Stu, and our new brawlers, Brock, Leon, Mortis, and Rico moving up into the S tier. These are brawlers that you really cannot go wrong with. Now, Belle is taking Stu's place as the golden S tier brawler, voted as the absolute best brawler for this mode by over half of the votes from the pros. Up next is Brawl Ball. Here are all the brawlers in the F tier and the C tier. I don't recommend playing these unless you are a random and you just want to cause your teammates pain. There are a lot of brawlers in the B tier, which means that there are a lot of decent choices to make, and the brawlers that are moving down into the B tier from higher tiers are Barley, BB, Colonel Ruffs, Jessie, Nita, Rosa, and Sprout. The brawlers that are moving up into the B tier are Daryl, Edgar, and Piper. We also have Ash and Squeak who are starting out in the B tier. I wanted to mention that this tier list was made after Squeak received a number of buffs, which it just goes to show that Squeak is a little bit more viable than you guys might think. The only brawlers moving down into the A tier are Max and Poco, and the brawlers being promoted up into the A tier are Crow, Ems, Leon, Rico, Tara, and Surge. Buzz and Griff are also starting in the A tier as well. In the S tier, we have Belle, Sandy, Stu, Brock, and Spike. Belle is once again stealing Stu's golden frame and was voted as the best brawler for this mode by almost half of the votes. Up next is Heist. Here are all of the brawlers in the F tier and the C tier. You'll notice that Ash is starting in the C tier. Rip Ash. The brawlers that are moving down into the B tier include 8-Bit, Colonel Ruffs, Jessie, Max, Sprout, and Stu, and the brawlers that are moving up into the B tier include Dynamite and El Primo. Buzz, Griff, and Squeak are all starting out in the B tier. The only brawler moving down into the A tier is Colette, and the brawlers that are moving up into the A tier are Piper and Spike. Our S tier consists of Brock, Barley, Belle, and Rico, and Brock surpasses Barley now as the best brawler for Heist by winning over half of the votes, especially because a lot of the maps in Heist right now are very long ranged. Also, Brock's just kind of a beast. And here's the bounty tier list. Once again, we're starting off with the C tier and the F tier. If you really want to take a screenshot, be my guest. Ash is starting in the F tier tier, and Griff is starting in the C tier. Mr. P and Poco are the only brawlers moving down into the B tier. Edgar and Rico are the only brawlers moving up into the B tier, and we have Buzz and Squeak who are starting out in the B tier. Now in the A tier, we have Sprout and Stu moving down from the S tier, and Leon is moving up into the A tier. The S tier actually looks almost exactly the same as the last tier list, except for Brock not only moving up into the S tier, but removing Belle as the best brawler for Bounty. And then also in the S tier, we obviously have Belle, Nani, Piper, and Tick. Now just a reminder that since most of the brawlers on this tier list are actually at the bottom, it's really important that you guys know who you're going to be picking when you're playing this mode, especially since there are fewer competitive options. And now we've got Siege, my favorite game mode, removed from Power League, which just makes me sad. In fact, speaking of which, since it's no longer a competitive game mode and Knockout's not a competitive game mode, do you guys even want me to make a tier list for those game modes? I'm actually thinking about removing them, so let me know in the comment section below, because these videos take a long time to put together. Here are the C tier and F tier brawlers for Siege. Ash is actually starting in the C tier, and then we have BD, Colonel Ruffs, Poco, and Tick, who are all moving down into the B tier, while Crow, Dynamite, and El Primo are moving up into the B tier. Griff is starting in the B tier, and then in the A tier, we have Max, Sprout, and Stu, who are moving down from the previous tier list, and moving up into the A tier are Brock, Leon, Mortis, Pam, Rico, and Spike. We also have Squeak starting out in the A tier, and then finally, we've got the S tier brawlers. Sandy is moving up thanks to his new gadget, Buzz is starting out in the S tier, Barley remains in the S tier, and Belle is replacing Barley as the golden S tier brawler, the best brawler for Siege. Up next, Hot Zone. Here are the C and the F tiers. You'll notice that Ash is starting out in the C tier. Poor Ash. Moving down into the B tier are Barley, BB, Jesse, Lou, Max, Surge, and Tick. And moving up into the B tier, we've got Crow, Jean, and Piper. Now, Griff and Squeak are also starting out in the B tier. In the A tier, we've got Poco, Sandy, and Stu, who have been demoted. And being promoted into the A tier are Brock, Mortis, Rico, and Spike. Now, Buzz is starting out in the A tier. In the S tier, we have just 2 brawlers. Okay, Belle is replacing Stu as the best brawler for Hot Zone, and moving all of the way from the F tier is Lollipop Drop. I mean, Leon, because at this point, he's pretty much just a gadget. Next, we got the first ever Knockout tier list. Here are the F tier and the C tier brawlers for Knockout. Now, you're actually gonna notice some common themes for these non-competitive options for the mode. Tanks struggle in Knockout because they just get picked on from a distance until they can charge their super, and a lot of times they just end up dying before they charge their super. And then you also have brawlers like Tara, Penny, or Jesse who have supers that are really important, but take so long for them to charge up even from a distance. Squishy brawlers like Dynamite or Barley are easy targets. Then you also have brawlers like 8-Bit or Colt that can deal a lot of damage, but they kind of struggle to finish enemies off because of their really predictable attack patterns. Next, we have the B tier brawlers that can actually be pretty good on the right map or with the right team comps or against certain brawlers. I think a lot of these brawlers just kind of make sense. You can play them. They're okay to play for quests, but there are better options. In the A tier, we have Buzz, Mortis, and Stu, who are all pretty good assassins. Then we got Tick and Sprout, who are both great long-range thrower options. Jean is actually a fun brawler if you're patient enough to charge your super from a distance, and Byron is really great. Oh, he's so good. He can keep his teammates alive or kill anybody that gets too close to him. Plus, he has that super that just deals a lot of damage over walls. Then you got a few other solid options like Griff, Spike, Rico, and Squeak. And then finally, we've got the S tier brawlers that are the best in Knockout. Brock was voted by the pros as the best brawler for the mode, and then Belle and Piper are like 2 obvious other great choices. And then Leon is straight up insane in Knockout thanks to his gadget, and the fact that just getting 1 or 2 kills with his invisibility can easily win a match for you. Then we got Nani, who can dish out a ton of damage with her attack, can one-shot some brawlers with her super, which is just insane. And then her return to sender gadget, which is still very strong despite getting some nerfs. Now, even though the pro players don't play Knockout nearly as much as the other game modes in Power League, I'd actually say that they did a really good job with this tier list. And now it is time for the overall tier list. For this tier list, brawlers get points depending on what tier placements they got in all the different game modes, then we add all of those points up together. They get 0 points for being in the F tier for a game mode, 1 for being in the C tier, 2 points for B tier, 4 points for A tier, and then it jumps clear up to 9 points for an S tier placement. This point system is designed so that the brawlers that are competitive, even just a couple of modes, will stand out over brawlers that are kind of just generally okay everywhere. Here are the F tier brawlers who all had between 0 and 5 total points. Shelly is still at the very bottom, even though her Clay Pigeons gadget got a buff. Her 1 point is in Brawl Ball, just in case you're curious. And I find it actually really interesting that even though the tanks got a new trait that makes it so that their supers automatically charge when they receive damage, Frank, Bull, and Jackie all find themselves in the lowest tier still in the competitive meta. Here are the C tier brawlers who all had between 6 and 10 total points. Here's where the other tanks ended up being, with the exception of one brawler, which we'll be talking about soon. And you'll also find out that Ash is starting here as a generally underwhelming brawler competitively. I was surprised to see Jessie so low, since I'm not really a competitive player, but I'm still seeing a lot of people playing Jessie in like Diamond 2 or 3. Next, we have the B tier brawlers, which all had between 11 and 19 total points. This is where Griff is starting out, and it's also where El Primo is. As a reminder, El Primo had 0 points in the last tier list, so this is a significant improvement for him. I'm really hopeful that Supercell will be able to figure out some other way with the charging trait so that the other tanks can somehow make their way up into the higher tiers. Next are the A tier brawlers who had between 20 and 29 total points. This is where both Squeak and Buzz find themselves, and is actually a nice reminder that Squeak might be better than you might think he is. Interestingly enough, Squeak was actually rated much higher by the pros than the other high ranked players that kind of helped out with the breaking ties in this tier list. That really suggests that Squeak is probably pretty good, and you probably need to try him out. You'll also notice that Mortis has almost doubled his score since the last tier list, thanks to the change with his Coiled Snake star power. He is really strong with Creepy Harvest, so it might be time to play him some more. And here are the S tier brawlers who had 30 or more total points, and you'll actually notice that not all S tier brawlers are equal. Belle had more than double Spike's total score, and is crowned the champion of the competitive meta right now. Brock is sitting pretty high still in his number 2 spot with 53 points. After that, there's a little bit more of a normal rating of 40 points with Leon. That's still really high, but it's a little bit more normal in comparison to the S tier brawlers. And he actually is the most improved brawler from the last tier list, since he moved clear down from the F up into the S tier. Next is Rico, who gets second most improved since the last tier list, all thanks to his bouncy castle gadget. It does a great job of keeping him alive. Then we have Sandy, who was great in the last meta and is just still great. And although Piper hasn't had any major changes, she is one of the best counters to Belle and Brock, or at least like a good second option, which justifies her spot in the S tier as well. Lastly, in the S tier, we have Spike, who's moving up from the B tier, all thanks to his life plant gadget. Also because of the fact that he's actually a really great counter against assassins like Leon, Buzz, and Mortis, who we're seeing a lot more of. And that, my fellow brawlers, is version 24 of the Brawl Stars tier list. Once again, I wanted to give a huge thank you to the 26 pros who helped make this video, and I also wanted to thank these 29 highly ranked players who broke any ties or close votes that the pros had. I'm gonna be a little honest with you guys, okay? These tier lists take up to 5 times longer than most of my other videos to make, and they actually don't get as many views as most of my other videos because they're only good to watch for a little while. Honestly, from a financial perspective, it is not worth it for me to put as much effort into these videos as I do. However, not only do I really enjoy this tier list series, but I think it's really helpful for a lot of you guys that are watching and come to my channel for it. With that said, if you want to share my tier list, I ask that you please share this video rather than just post pictures of it, okay? I know you just want to post pictures. I get it. I understand that. Sharing my video goes a long way in helping this video not only just get more views from the people that you share it to, but also that is a signal to YouTube saying, hey, this is a video we're sharing. Let's actually share it on YouTube itself. And that's how I make most of my money on YouTube. You can also support my channel by using code Kairos in the Brawl Stars shop and by watching more videos, which you can watch right here because this video is over. Also, please consider subscribing and turning on that notification bell so you do get notified the next time my video goes out. And feel free to let me know in the comment section below what you thought about this tier list. For now, this is KairosTime ticking by, and we will see you in the next video and in the next tier list. And I don't know why I ended this weird. See ya.